very well.
Legitimately, you seem good.
I'm good. Yeah, I've had a good week. I've had a good week.
It's Tuesday.
I might crash at some point because I got up at 6:15 to go in the sea this morning.
Oh, did you? How was that?
It was nice. It was good. I've not done it. I've not done it in about a month.
Did you scream?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a bit of a saga because it was cold, and in the autumn I was like, I'm going to go in the sea and I'll scream and I'll shout and I'll holler and you never get any opportunity. There's very few opportunities to sort of like
To have a holler.
I mean, I suppose people people find them, don't they? But I don't.
Sure.
I rarely do.
Sure.
So yeah, sometimes I even swear very loudly. And then as we got into winter and it got colder and colder in the sea, I was a bit like, I started to limit myself in my shouting because I felt like if I shout too much, it gives too much power to the sea.
Yeah.
And kind of like, I need to trick myself into actually thinking it's not cold. Whereas like before I could just be like silly. It was cold, but it's an opportunity to be a bit like performative. Make a scene, as it were.
Make a scene, yeah.
But now in the dead of winter, I'm like, I have to take it actually seriously. I can't. But today I did a lot. Today we got past we got back to the point where it was cold enough to necessitate a little bit of shouting just to like get through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I never would have thought it would be for me, but I find it. I've been missing it, and I find it quite
lovely.
We're talking like a minute tops in the water kind of thing. Like,
we're talking seconds.
Yeah.
A measurement of seconds.
Yeah. How are you, Jack?
I'm doing good. I got up relatively early to go to the allotment before work, which was nice because today's beautiful. It was lovely, and I was like, I'm just going to be locked in my room for 8 hours because of my new job, so I would like to go enjoy it a bit. Went to the allotment, planted some garlic, planted some onions. It's going to rain for the next few days. I was like, I should probably plant them now, give them a little bit of time to go. Put together some more beds right before this. Feeling pretty good about the allotment. I'll be honest. It's coming along.
I've been feeling very invigorated about the gardening as well.
Yes.
We're making a good plan.
Yes.
There are spreadsheets.
I was going to say, I just put together a spreadsheet today. I was like, oh God, my new job is leaking into my life. I was like, maybe I should make an Excel spreadsheet about when I planted things.
Now I've successfully pretended to know how to use a spreadsheet, and if I get a job,
yeah, exactly.
I can use this opportunity to practice my spreadsheets by working out when I'm going to plant my potatoes.
I know. I texted my brother, and I was like, wow, lot of like Microsoft team meetings, and I should not have said that I'm proficient in Excel. And he's like, welcome to an office job.
That is it.
Yeah, but it's good. It's at least today, these last few days, it's motivated me to like enjoy the bits of the day that I'm not working a lot more.
Yeah.
Whereas like I used to just come home and just crash. Now it's like, get up early.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. You're not physically exhausted by
exactly.
work.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll get there.
I definitely will get there. I'm mentally exhausted. It was funny, like we had a big team meeting or whatever, and they do this thing where it's like, everybody say like traffic light system, how you're feeling about your workload, and it's like literally everyone was like red, orange, red, orange, orange, and I was just like, yeah, green. It's like I'm fine. It's my second day. I don't care. Altogether though, good day. Very good day. I think we can agree that today was a good day. March the 9th. Good day.
You can go down in history.
It'll go down in history before we get a week of rain. So
yeah. I'm meant to check it down tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah, I know, because I guess it was warmer a bit today. Because when I saw that it was going to be clear, I was like, it'll be freezing. But then I left the house and I had a jacket on. And I was like, oh my God, I don't need a jacket. Spring's here. And then I looked at the weather and I was like, no, it's not.
Yeah, this is spring. The promise, and then the claw it back from you.
Yeah.
Something like that.
You did tell me that there's going to be more rain, perhaps more precipitation in spring. How does summer fare to spring in terms of precipitation? More or less? Probably less.
Who can say?
Who can say?
Who can say?
Who can say?
To consult the sages. I think they vary year on year, don't they? The way it's been going.
These
drier.
days. Yeah.
Drier and warmer.
Gotcha.
Ordinarily.
Yeah, sure.
I suppose.
All right. Well, we can deal with that.
So you've got that to look forward to, I suppose.
I suppose so. Yeah, it should be good.
What else?
I don't know. Oh, those damn Royals, Dan.
Oh, yes.
I don't actually know what's going on. I don't care to learn.
No.
I just think it's funny whenever a Royals in the news, because I like seeing British tabloids that are like,
Yeah, well, one of the tabloids had the headline, "The greatest crisis in the royal family in 85 years."
Saw that, yeah.
As if they've forgotten about whatever his name is.
The pedophile?
The pedophile
I
prince,
suppose
yeah.
which pedophile?
Yeah.
Which Nazi pedophile? Just kidding. We love our royals, folks.
Allegedly. They're all allegedly.
You can't see Dan winking.
Yeah. Yeah. Winking with my sort of like lizard eyes.
Yeah. I did see the headline today that was like the palace has had a meeting about what to do, and it's like,
yeah,
meeting about what
whenever
to
they
do.
start talking about the palace,
Yeah, I know.
and
The
the like
palace.
first person or something, like,
Jesus.
they're mobilized.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You want to hear something awesome? So
Please.
a very good friend of mine told me recently that when they were young, they lived near a I don't know, bit of woods or wherever, where like the lords or whoever would go and have their like fake fox hunt, right? And I guess real fox hunt, because this was a while ago. And they said that they used to go and slash their tires.
Nice.
Isn't that awesome? I heard that and I was just like,
Nice. Yeah.
rock.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
Yeah. This is a pro hunt sabotage podcast.
Absolutely. I only learned about that whole history of fox hunting recently. That it didn't Blair stop it, which was like recently.
They made the fox hunting ban, I guess, came into force in the mid aughts.
But it wasn't like you
But
could just go hunt
what it prohibits is like what you would imagine you would want to prohibit. It basically prohibits the fox hunters from using hounds to actually kill the foxes.
Oh, okay.
They're still allowed to go out and blow their trumpets and be arseholes and pompous,
Oh, okay.
and with their dogs. But ostensibly, they're supposed to shoot the foxes.
Oh my god! Okay.
So they're still hunting foxes.
Oh, all right.
I think. And then
That's lame.
obviously they don't observe the rules or the law, and
Sure.
they're seldom. I guess I'm just making it up now, but I imagine they're seldom prosecuted, and if they are, obviously they're rich, pompous arseholes, and
Yeah.
so they can get away with it, kind of thing.
You know, there are cool versions of hunting, like in like Mongolia, the like ceremonial like eagles that you train to hunt. Something about just shooting a fox to the head is so lame.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You on horseback, massive pack of humans on horsebacks, flanked by an even bigger pack of dogs. Chase fox into a corner and then shoot it.
Shoot it. Shoot the dog. Jesus. Oh, we love the lords, don't we, folks? Can anybody do that? Can anybody shoot a fox?
Oh, probably not.
For God's sake.
Well, nobody's got any guns. have they?
Yeah, true. Oh, dear.
I don't know. Yeah, you try it. Get on your bicycle and get a red coat on and
Shoot
go
fox.
out and
Get my bow and arrow.
yeah. I mean, we wouldn't want to do that.
That would not be fun. It'd be kind of sad.
I like foxes.
Foxes are really cool.
Yeah, I've not seen them so many. I'd have thought
It's
I'd
true,
have
I
seen
haven't
more
either.
of them in the past year, perhaps, than I
Yeah.
used to. But maybe I don't go out walking at dusk very often, or you usually just see them walking the streets.
Yeah,
At-
my first
at
year here, I
dusk
feel like
kind
it's
of
a
time.
5.
Just weird, and you'd think they'd be really skittish, but they're not. They're kind of almost spectral. Like they're almost like they don't quite. I feel like they inhabit some kind of realm between ours and some other place. They sort of like
Ooh.
ghosts. They just sort of stalk
Oh,
around. They're not intimidating or scary. They're just a bit kind of like,
Oh,
what was that? Okay.
There goes the
Okay.
fox.
Just not really engaged with our world, kind of thing.
we should get a fox on the show, get its perspective.
Yeah.
I saw a fox in town, in the middle of town, and it was just the most raggedy, like Beatrix Potter, like homeless fox ever. I was just like, man, get out of here, go to the forest. Like, it's just probably living pretty good, honestly.
I don't know.
When I first got here, I saw a fox. That was like the first animal that I saw in the wild, and I was like, "Oh my god, that was awesome!" Then I saw a hedgehog, and I was like, I didn't know what it was. It was just walking down the street, and I was like, "What is that thing?" I had to take a photo of it and show it to someone. I was like, "Get out of here!" And then I saw a slow worm, and I was like, "What the fuck is that?" Not a snake, even though it looks like a snake.
Not a snake.
Yeah, not a snake at all.
Good guys.
Very good guys. All of previously mentioned, very good guys.
All aforementioned animals.
Hedgehogs.
Podcast favorites.
Podcast favorites, absolutely. Where I used to live, we like a year ago we had a hedgehog in the garden, and we looked up what hedgehogs like. Apparently, they like peanuts, and I thought that was funny. It's
They like peanuts.
they like peanuts,
We
yeah.
have a hedgehog that frequents our garden.
Oh.
You hear him rustling occasionally. I think he eats the snails and slugs, hopefully.
So the cat's not. I guess they can't. I guess they're spiky.
They don't know what to bother. They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I guess so.
And,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
There we go.
You know what, Dan? That brings us so nicely into what we're reading, which is finally State and Revolution by Vladimir.
I know, we
Just
keep
kidding.
promising it. We've been promising it.
No, my God, Dan, what are we reading today?
I think
We're reading something a little wild.
I think we both genuinely really quite enjoyed this one, did we not?
I will go so far as to say that I loved what we read today. Really, really dug it. Excellent suggestion. Go ahead and tell us about it.
We read because we're lazy and because it's dense. We read the first chapter of Murray Bookchin's The Ecology of Freedom.
And the introduction.
Oh yeah. Which is entitled Social Ecology.
I forget, so I'll take your word on
it. We're gonna try and cover social ecology according to 20th century American anarchist Murray Bookchin.
Murray Q. Bookchin. Yeah, this rocked for a number of reasons. I know if you listen to our episode 20, kind of recap, we talked about it, we wanted to do some ecology, and this seemed like a great place to have an introduction to what Bookchin calls social ecology.
And we keep promising to do a deep dive critique on our anarchist comrades.
Yeah, well,
and instead we're probably going to become an anarchist
exactly. I'm interested in kind of getting into the Marxist versus anarchist kind of, in my opinion, kind of unnecessary spat. You know what I mean? Because obviously you get it. Dan on the show has called anarchist. Was that on the show? Did you call anarchist liberals on the show, or is that extracurricular?
No, I think that an extracurricular hot take.
Yeah. But no, I am firmly of the belief that you should be kind of being guided by interest and not dogma, and obviously all the caveats of we are reading an anarchist. Don't 100% agree with him on a lot of stuff, but I will say, went into this thinking that I was going to disagree with him about a lot more. Wound up coming out the other side being like, this was it.
Yeah, I mean, he comes across as incredibly erudite, incredibly well-informed and well-read. Clearly has a huge amount to say on a huge range of topics and is able to have a conversation with various different thinkers. Certainly holds to some classic anarchist critiques of sort of socialist communism, socialism, communism, Marxism, whatever we want to call it, whatever the other end, the red as opposed to the black in that distinction. I mean, that said, I think there is a huge amount of synthesis to be had between the two, actually.
Totally.
I wonder whether it's difficult because we haven't read the entirety of the book. We could have committed to try and do that, but we probably would have done the opposite of a shoddy job in the sense of we can either cover a certain portion well, but with gaps, or we could cover a huge portion with a greater number of gaps in different ways.
So the caveat there is we don't know what he says in the chapters. It can be pretty crazy. This stuff.
And I actually think a partial reading might be quite offensive to him. I think he says in the introduction quite specifically. So rest in peace, the ghost of Murray Bookchin and all of his rabid followers and fans, friends, and assorted
family members.
Entourage.
Well-wishers.
This is not the end.
I came to the conclusion after just looking up some videos of him and watching him talk, and I've said this to you before, that if I were to be just at a bar and just hanging out with some friends, and Murray Bookchin were to come and sit down next to me, I'd want to blow my brains out. He seems like a great, really smart, cool guy, but he just seems like he would not shut up.
Yeah, he might well hassle you on things.
Yeah. Exactly.
You'd give enough cues for a change of topic or a change of venue, and it just
Brett Gardner is the greatest outfielder the New York Yankees have ever seen. It's okay, yeah, all right, buddy. But enough of my Bookchin tarnishing. This was really refreshing for a number of reasons. I think, for one, he says in the introduction that he's going to be writing this book in kind of a different way, right? He kind of says that if you're looking for an economic or very I suppose more academic written out book that you know what to expect, how it's all laid out, you're not going to find it here.
Yeah, he says it's not an analytical reading, it's a dialectical one. Whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Well, who knows?
But it's meant that I've written my notes attempting to like identify sort of dialectical oppositions. So there's terms on right and terms on the left. And
Dan has the word future with two arrows pointing to different words.
So yeah, Murray Bookchin has promised dialectic, and I've looked for dialectic everywhere.
I feel like with our capital reading, I was getting very close to understanding what that meant, and now I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, fuck knows. Fuck knows. But he equally hints at the possibility of dialectic being weird and sort of. Yeah, he suggests a potential derisory reading of the dialectic, which suggests that it's
the dialectic
possible for abuse.
Yeah, well, he says that too about
basically every term.
Exactly, literally every word.
I am the only person who knows how to use any of these pieces of terminology.
I like because he says that, but then he also just
total moron.
Exactly, he just completely redefines certain words. So I mean, I guess the two most important words, right, that he's working with. Maybe not the two most important words. One is obviously ecology. The other one is environmentalism. So he kind of tries to push back on the like, come on, bro, why can't we all just like live with nature, dude, kind of thing, as being like almost utilitarian, because he defines environmentalism as like a way of viewing ourselves as using everything that's in the environment, or at least viewing everything that's in the environment and in nature, inorganic things as well as like organic things, nature, animals, things like that, as just like objects. And when you see them as objects to be sustainably used, they're still just objects to be used. Where he's saying, with ecology, he's kind of trying to make it a little bit more like systems theory, although he derides systems theory quite a bit. He kind of just says like, ecology is a way of viewing that we are as much a part of this system of nature and of like, I guess, just the entire earth as like, you know, something that is just using all of these things. So he kind of like tries to bring together the views of like the natural world as like a system outside of us, but that we're also part of, and like the man-made social world, right? So that's kind of what he's doing. I guess that's kind of like the purpose of a social ecology.
But to bring together without collapsing them
exactly
into one.
Yeah.
I think. Which is, I mean, there's a great many really fascinating ways to launch into talking about this book. I mean, one of them would be to say that largely what this book is quite like a historical anthropology of sort of like human development, I suppose. I think what he's attempted to do is chart that process by which human beings have diverged from the natural world, but escape either suggesting that they're so wildly different that they're totally different things, nor to fall back on a sort of crude collapsing the two into one kind of thing, which is quite incredibly refreshing to find, right? Because so often you could imagine, well, there's so many ways where he pushes back or distances himself from what you might describe as like primitivism, right? Like, there's absolutely no sense in which he's suggesting we need to go back. We need to go back to the sort of the point at which human beings were in synthesis with nature, kind of thing.
Yeah. Or just like a fluffy view of like, let's all just get along.
Yes, quite. Yeah. Nor is he obviously like taking the opposite view that human beings, as you were just saying, can have this kind of like instrumental relationship with nature in some way. And then, that's sort of the crux of the sort of environmental versus ecology distinction, is the kind of like, as you were saying, he kind of suggests that environmental thinking is influenced by these hallmarks of a certain type of scientific thinking and a sort of type of analytic thinking, which is very much like looking at any one particular relationship and removing it from the sort of web and connection of all of other relationships in a system. And then, and then obviously, if you're looking at a relationship between things, you almost end up at the point where like there's one active component and one passive component kind of thing. There's human beings being active against a passive nature kind of thing, or there's like it sort of goes around. You go around sort of designating things as discrete things that stand in opposition to other elements in the system, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, the model that he is championing more is sort of what he's describing as an ecological one, which recognizes everything as kind of like a web, like a food web kind of thing, where everything has some kind of relationship to all of the parts of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was interesting too. You brought up the word like passivity when you're trying to describe like this kind of environmental view of like people dominating nature and kind of things. And it was cool because he brought up the William Petty quote from the Marx quote from Capital Chapter 1, which was really interesting, where he kind of critiques Marx's taking on that quote as saying, you know, labor is the father or whatever, and nature is the mother. And he says that that kind of like gendered language implies this passivity to nature, which isn't true at all.
Sure,
you know?
yeah.
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. He's quite interesting. Like as you say, that human mother distinction is like human beings, the active father, sort of like utilizing sort of the passive nature, and he suggests, well, the opposite is totally true, right? You really have to recognize the ways in which a kind of active nature has an impact on a sort of human raw material kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he goes so far as to suggest that there might be like a new form of historical materialism that would result from that kind of thing. Or maybe the better thing would be to say that like a proper historical materialism would be one that recognized the back and forth,
the like greatest material basis that there is, which is nature.
Yeah. No, I don't know to what extent like that's a legitimate criticism of Marx and Marxism. Obviously, like Marxism has taken that turn toward like
it just seems like he has different interests. So he's just writing something that's more specific to nature. So I think that idea of like historical materialism as it relates to ecology is really interesting, right? Because he has, at a certain point, he talks about how you need, much like in our Ellen Meakson's Wood reading, she was saying that you need to bring the study of history into the study of class. He was saying you need to bring the study of history into ecology, because at one point I think he says something along the lines of like, you go to like a biome or something, it's never just a random collection of plants that's just there because, right? It's like if you're from the part of the country in the United States that I'm from, say you're trying to like make a bit of farmland, you're going to need to know the history of that land to work it, right? Because you're going to need to know like, oh wow, wildfire came through here like 2 years ago, then like destroyed everything, or like there used to be a highway here, or like that tree fell down because of this or whatever. So I thought that was really interesting, and it made me again just think of the Ellen Meakson's Wood reading. It's bringing a sense of history into a study that might not have or should have it, right? But yeah, and then it was interesting too because I kind of went back and I was drawing other comparisons to things that we've read, and he talks quite a bit about systems theory, right? Maybe not quite a bit, but you can tell that that's kind of what he's thinking about. And he says at one point, like, whatever the benefits of systems theory are, which there are, like in looking at complex systems like environments and humans' relationship to environment, it kind of just, in his view, just views humans and other things as like producers and consumers of energy and nothing more, which he basically says like you can't really do that if you're trying to understand how something actually works. And I wouldn't say if you're trying to control that system, because I think that's something that he would like definitely have a problem with, saying that, you know, the point isn't to control nature at all. It's this ecological view. It's to live within the system and to maybe not harness, again, that's not the right word either, but like work with it.
Yeah, I mean, it suggests it would be the height of hubris and real stupidity for anybody to think that they could chart all aspects of a system. I think that's basically what he's saying. There are aspects that are incredibly complicated. There's a great degree of sort of spontaneity, I suppose. A huge amount of complexity. And a system that's built over long periods of time, I suppose. I mean, I guess one of the better examples might be like an ecological system, or like a food web, I suppose, for want of a better word.
Sure.
Like, or any natural system, I suppose, or any ecological system.
I think soil is a good example.
Yeah, as sort of history plays out. Systems obviously they're not continuously develop into more greater complexity. Obviously there are things which will set back the complexity.
Sure.
But the trend is towards a greater development of complexity in a system,
which makes it stable.
Which makes a system more stable. For example, like the more complicated a food web, I suppose, right, which is a food chain, Bookchin would probably suggest was far too hierarchical a form of thinking. Whereas like the web of all the connections, all of the sort of predatory relationships, or all of the consumptive relationships, like all of those animals are forging out more and more niches in a system, and the more niches that can be forged out, the more places there are for animals to occupy in a system, and therefore the more animals that are in a system and the more complicated it is, the more resilient that system is toward any damage to it, i.e. if some kind of species were removed from it, like a new balance can be achieved relatively easily compared to like a habitat where there is one really significant predator or prey, and if one of them disappeared, then the system would be thrown into quite significant chaos.
He uses the example of the Arctic for that, like if a polar bear were to disappear,
sort of
it would just blow
desert
up.
environment.
Yeah.
To which I sort of interpret to mean, well, that like the ideal stable system is almost one that's always moving away from our ability to comprehend it, kind of thing.
It's
like,
the law of requisite variety, almost.
Yeah.
Diversity counters diversity.
Yeah.
Complex. Well, yeah, you know what I mean. I mean, it's also just to a certain extent black boxing, because like he gives the example of soil, where it's like he goes into the problems of monoculture as like, you know, fields and miles of just grain. Is that just absolutely destroying the complexity of the soil? I know that makes it really bad for us in the long run, potentially apocalyptic for us in the long run. But he makes the point that like this isn't some like hippy dippy nonsense where it's like, whoa, dude, just like leave the soil alone. You're not gonna ever understand it. He's like, no, you literally, like scientists literally cannot map out every organism and every thing that's going on in the soil. They just can't map out the system of just common healthy soil. So don't try, black box it and try and develop systems that work around it, like not just planting corn as the only plant for 50 miles, as, you know, having, I don't know, things other than corn, showing off my knowledge here. But again, I mean, that just made me think of like black boxing. So much of this just reminded me of Stafford Beer.
Yeah, there were so many times where I was sort of like made some kind of reference to cybernetics in some way or other. He sort of sums up this relationship by saying that the integrity of a system depends not on uniformity but diversity. And if human beings are to learn to relate to a complex system, a complex environmental system, which, as we've said, Bookchin says that he thinks that human beings sit outside of and need to learn to have some kind of complementary relationship to, human beings need to learn to allow for the highest possible degree of natural spontaneity in those kind of systems. But as you say, like he says it's not like a total surrender to to the whims of the historical system, I suppose. He's more. He quotes somebody who the name of the name of the person that he quotes I can't remember, nor am I going to read out the entire quote. But he suggests he makes this distinction between human beings' relationship to the natural world is not one of a game of chess, but more like steering a boat, where you sort of like learn to follow the eddies and the currents kind of thing, but you don't seek to master the entire system or the entire process kind of thing.
There were a couple moments in this book where
which made
that's beautiful.
so I just wrote sort of steersmanship with exclamation marks because it's sort of it's not quite cybernetic steersmanship, but the analogy was close enough.
There is someone
steering a boat. Somebody's steering.
There's someone steering a boat.
Somebody's steering, but that's just, that process is a sort of like feedback mechanism of what's happening in the system. It's not total control kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was good, right? Because he doesn't just totally invalidate like orthodox Marxist thought or anything like that. And indeed, he like even just, you know, like tries to marry his thought and that together at certain points, as much as he critiques it. But it was interesting the way that he marries the idea of like the man-made social world with the like crises of I said crises of environmentalism. I suppose crises of ecology, right? Because he basically says, you know, you can't think of ecological crises as just humans sitting in the middle like of this web, or even just in this web, and it's all just kind of like happening to us and happening around us. He's like, you do need to consider the social world that we've created, which has a massive impact on ecology. And because he is an anarchist, of course, he uses the words hierarchy a lot more than you'd probably find in any other like Marxist, capital M Marxist text, and to mean something a little bit more broad. I was wondering if we should kind of talk about that because I don't think anything that he brought up and like his ideas of hierarchy were things that Marxists would really ever disagree with. He's like, dude, it's not just economic exploitation. It's like, the old dominating the young and like men dominating women, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, yeah, you're correct.
Sure. You're damn right. And he makes a very vital point. I think this is an introduction. He makes a very vital point that like even post some kind of like transition to a socialist society, as we might identified ourselves with in previous episodes, like you're still not going to do away with those forms of hierarchy or forms of domination kind of thing. I mean, yeah, I sort of hope that there is at least enough of a way to make these two complementary descriptions of history and historical process sort of overlap in terms of looking at them in just different degrees of focus. Obviously they're not going to always agree, and obviously like Marxists might look intuitively, instinctively to a certain place in society, say, look to certain factors. I don't know, economic. They might look toward the mode of production or towards class in a way that Bookchin might look toward other forms of relationship. I mean, it's probably worth saying that, like, I think that the scope of this book really is to show how hierarchy developed out of. He doesn't use the phrase primitive societies. He quite likes to use the phrase non-lingual societies. Or the second chapter is on organic societies. So I think he talks about organic societies and how there's been this process of like the development of greater and different forms of hierarchy. Which, I mean, we wouldn't disagree with that there has been this sort of development from some kind of originating form of what Marx might have called like primitive communism kind of thing, like but this description and a Marxist description don't necessarily differ on the sort of trajectory of history that's happened kind of thing.
I mean, I guess
some of the causal relationships may differ to some extent, but I mean, I don't know, like the further back in time you go, like to the extent that this is a much more heavily anthropological text, I feel like the further back in time you go, the less space there is for conflict between the two systems of describing historical development, I suppose.
I mean, it certainly doesn't seem as mutually exclusive as he kind of makes it out to be. I think that knowing as little as I do about his life, it certainly seems like these are kind of very unsurprising views for him to come to, as someone who would eventually kind of wind up calling themselves an anarchist. Coming out of like, collapse of the Soviet Union, but also well before that, like Stalinism, it kind of makes sense that he's coming at like a very critical, kind of like combative, perhaps, way of understanding things. I mean, it certainly seems like, again, that all of these ideas about hierarchy are not as exclusive as perhaps a lot of, I'm not going to say that, perhaps as some anarchists would have you believe. Because, I mean, I don't think there are any Marxists out there, communists, who would say once, like, the ownership of the means of production has been transferred to the people who are actually working them, everything's going to be fine. I think that that's not true at all, obviously. And I think that it just speaks to kind of like the frustrations that I have between this split, which is like, yeah, some anarchists can be a little bit technologically deterministic. Yeah, some anarchists can kind of be like, take it way too far and be like, well, like markets, that's just not it at all, dude. Like, that isn't the biggest problem. Things like that. It's everything, dude. I don't know. I just have like this frustration with people who kind of maybe like aren't able to marry these ideas in like a very satisfactory way, because it seems pretty easy to do to me coming at it from this. I don't know. Call me crazy.
One of the reasons why I've sometimes, and as you said in the past, sometimes suggested that in my mind there is some overlap between anarchistic thinking and a certain definition of liberalism. And the sort of the definition of liberalism that I would be going after is one that sort of suggested that there was a sort of simple change in behavior that would create a synthesis, not a synthesis, that would overcome a conflict in society, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it's basically just a matter of sort of talking things out, shall we say, or like quite an easy rejigging of the relationships between people.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, maybe not easy, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I don't know. Or what would be a better way of phrasing it?
Simple, but not easy, perhaps. Like it is like something that, like it is like you can point to this.
Well, I
one
suppose
problem,
it's
it's
about
like,
relationships between individuals
Exactly,
to some
yeah.
extent. Liberalism is interested in the relationship between individuals, whereas like we would be much more interested in like long-term historical processes and the relationship between structures and structural relationships and how they kind of dictate how individuals behave outside of how they might otherwise conceptualize their behavior or justify or want to believe themselves to be, kind of thing. And there was a point in this when I got a little bit worried that Bookchin might fall into that sort of first category, but it's definitely not the case. His thrust is to build up an explanation how we've gotten to this sort of how there's been this very gradual historical process of development toward hierarchy. And he in his descriptions between like the world of animals and the social world of human beings, he basically suggests that there's a massive difference between human hierarchy on domination and the domination that you see in the animal kingdom, even in like groups of monkeys and higher primates and that kind of thing. Whereas that's all about like any amount of domination that you see there, for the most part, are eccentricities of the behavior of individuals of those species. Whereas in human beings and the development of the social world of the human being, what you have are domination of human beings by social structures, and the roles that people take up in relationships of domination are a facet and a process of that historical development of social relationships and social structures, and definitely not that kind of like simple relationship between human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, can I just add too
Please,
that
yeah.
I think it was really interesting where he kind of says that like we actually place our views of hierarchy and domination onto the animal kingdom in a way that was like very recursive and strange. It's like almost like image of an image of an image kind of things, because he basically says when we describe a beehive, we talk about the queen bee, but like the queen bee isn't like I'm the boss,
Doesn't
I'm
know
the
they're
queen.
the queen.
Yeah, the queen bee is just like I have to have babies all day for the hive.
Yeah, I mean, it basically describes the hive as a reproductive system in and of itself for the most part, kind of thing.
Where everything knows its like part and does that for that purpose.
And he's incredibly derisory of any sort of like attempt at social science or sociology which attempts to draw a metaphor from like the structure of a beehive or an anthill or something to the structure of a complex human society, kind of thing.
And vice versa, Jane Goodall.
And again, yeah, it just goes after all of these like observations of the relationship between chickens, doesn't tell you anything about human beings, like, and the primate species or the species of monkeys that human beings decide to take their models from, to extrapolate from those societies to describe human beings, sort of like supposedly natural relationship that exists between human beings, tells you far more about the relationship of human beings in society than it does those monkeys, kind of thing. Like,
exactly.
why have you chosen to fixate on baboons, for example, who happen to have a much more sort of forms of society which tend towards sort of individual domination of others, kind of thing.
Tell me about your
Forgetting
father.
that, like,
Why did you choose
I was quite
those
interested in
baboons?
that, but yeah, I didn't know that like baboons are actually a type of monkey, kind of thing, and not. Hopefully, I'm getting my
and an ape.
primate species correct. Anyway, I don't know.
All I know is that monkeys have tails, right? Is that what you were saying? I think apes do not. Apes walk around with no tails. I think. I don't want any ape experts
Walking around with no tails.
walking around with no tails.
Disgusting.
It is disgusting. Have you ever seen the movie Shallow Hal?
No.
And I won't spoil it for you.
Shall I go out and look for it?
Maybe not. Just the last scene. So I did also think that when I think of anarchism versus like communism, I suppose that there is a very small distinction to be made in terms of like you get what you put into society, kind of, as like the maybe vulgar understanding of communism, versus the anarchism is just like you just get what you need from society, like, of course. But I mean, it was interesting because he brought up Marx and Proudhon as people who understood that a society needs to be based, a society of equality, right, needs to be based on a recognition of inherent inequalities. And that's not like some bureaucratic iron fist, like, you know, you're lesser than me. Like, this isn't like phrenology or anything like that. Like, he just makes the point that it's like, you can't have a society that's like, you get as much as you put in when there are people who just can't put in as much work. And so you need to recognize these inequalities as like just basic to everything, basic to the way things work.
Yeah, I mean, those inequalities are a facet of the complex ecology of a social system.
Yeah,
thing.
Absolutely.
Quite, yeah.
Quite. That's a good way of putting it. Very succinct.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. And also just his ideas of hierarchy as like the renunciation of pleasure. I thought that was really interesting, really fascinating, as like hierarchy breeds this view on the people who are like the quote unquote inferiors, the exploited perhaps, as like people who just have to toil, right?
Yeah,
and it just breeds you just sucking all of the life out of you. And it conversely, it makes it so that the exploiters are people who all they do is pleasure. They just breed disgusting pleasure, Caligula-esque pleasure in my mind, at least. And
it manifests itself in such warped and twisted, disgusting, awful manifestations as fox hunting.
Exactly, disgusting.
Syphilitic.
Syphilitic. I can't believe we talked about the House of Lords without me using the word syphilitic. Briefly, we have already said that the chaos god of communism,
Siege, yeah.
The chaos god of capitalism, Slanesh. Which you think would be a good thing. It's not. Where were we? Hierarchy?
I don't know. Kind of jumping around a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way he wrote the book, though, right? Because at the very beginning, he was like, this is just going to be me just getting it out.
Yeah,
there,
I expected it to be more of a mess than it actually was.
Yeah, I know. Like... He said that, and then I was like, I mean, I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
It
was actually quite concise.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of understand.
Except for like the 2 pages at the beginning, which were just like Odin.
About, like Odin and Thor and the world tree.
This could have been a paragraph.
Yeah.
It's anything about Odin.
Yeah. Is there anything interesting to say about that metaphor?
I mean, what was the point of the metaphor? Just that it's like, if you want knowledge, you have to give up your eye? I don't know. I guess the point was that then Odin could only see...
Worlds of giant snakes are cool.
Giant trees. I guess the point was that he made a bargain to get this, to see the world for how it really was, but then he had to give up his eye, so he only saw the world as someone would with one eye, I guess was the point. So it's like he wasn't actually seeing it how he was.
And it's okay.
I guess I skipped it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I decided. I was like, okay, start the book.
I don't know.
It was beautiful, Murray.
Pro ice giants.
Pro ice giants, absolutely. I would just like to complain about monoculture for a second again, because, as I was saying, we've been experimenting with a little bit of the no-dig beds, and I think that one of the main reasons that this was very refreshing for me, this book, was because it talked about a lot of things that you typically don't hear in kind of academic-y Marxist-y circles. The environment, which is like, sure, it gets talked about, but only as it relates to like perhaps metabolic rift and capitalism, and which is very important. But I thought that this idea of like soil degradation and of, I don't know, just certain slightly more specific, but also like potentially apocalyptic facets of capitalism really got their due here. And I was just like, awesome. Very, very cool.
I mean, like, props to Murray Bookchin, right? Writing, I mean, he's been like writing about ecology and ecological and environmental degradation since the 50s kind of thing.
Yeah.
This book written in the very early 80s. There's no mention of. I mean, there's several references to nuclear apocalypse, which like we have talked about before. I think like probably still a pressing concern, although a slightly reduced one. But like they didn't even know about like climate change that was resulting from emission of greenhouse gases. But the sketch he gives of like the apocalyptic and incredibly destructive circumstances that are coming about as a result of like
the loss of farmland.
Yeah, sort of capitalist degradation of the like as you say, like destruction of the sort of the soil, but huge amounts of air pollution. And obviously at this time you knew about like various different types of pesticides kind of thing.
Sure.
Just about to get the sort of CFC's business.
Not bad.
No. Anyway, yeah, he paints a suitably apocalyptic picture well ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
So props to Prophet Murray Bookchin.
Prophet Murray Bookchin.
Yeah.
Google Prophet Murray Bookchin. Yeah, I mean, I would like to know a little bit more actually about like the history of how much we've actually known for how long about climate change. Because I kind of, when did he write this? The 70s? We know.
Early 80s, 81.
Early 80s? Yeah, we know. Of course we know. But it just wasn't obviously being published.
Sure,
Published? It wasn't being published.
Yeah. I mean, people have known. Yeah, my understanding is that people have known the carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas for a long time. It's not hard to fill a box with carbon dioxide and see that it absorbs more light and holds onto more heat than like surrounding environment does.
The environment is important. That's what I got from this.
Yeah.
What do you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to monoculture really quickly, just the general idea, whether or not he knew like exactly how much it was or it could potentially affect our capacity to grow anything at all with the next 50, 60 years. Again, you're right. It doesn't take like a genius to be like, oh, soil is an incredibly complex system. We're making it extremely simplistic by taking all these nutrients out, not having any way to reproduce them, or at least the soil reproduce them naturally, and just basically putting nitrogen on the ground, which is just making it dirt.
Relying on chemical fertilizers, which like obviously do nothing for the complex ecosystem of the soil, and then end up killing all the pollinators.
Exactly.
I mean, this is another good example of like complex ecosystems becoming very fragile, right? Like the more you don't support a vast array of pollinators, the more you become dependent on one particular one, bees, perhaps.
No.
The more at threat your system is of collapsing because it's left so sort of fragile and open to just.
Yeah. How bad is the bee problem?
I don't know. Pretty bad. I'm led to believe.
I don't know. Bad. I've heard bad.
Give me explain a scale to me, Jack. What's the scale of like badness?
Well, 10's no
bad,
bees.
Very bad.
So, I haven't seen any bees recently.
How close to no bees are we at?
Felt like
I saw one very big bee a few weeks ago.
Is it a bumblebee?
It was a bumblebee, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Do they not pollinate like?
Yeah, presumably they do.
Yeah. Anyway, I've seen one bee, but it is only March, and that was probably in February. So
enough.
like,
I got scoffed at the other day. Did I tell you about this? For no dig beds. For someone at the allotments was like, "Oh, so what are you doing over at your plot?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm actually like I haven't been digging, so I'm trying to do like no till." And he just scoffed at me. He's like, "That's never gonna work." He said something like, "Oh, this grind, it's all well and good for some things, but you're not gonna get like ain't no dig Brussels sprout beds." And I was like, "I have to go to the fucking store and get Brussels sprout seeds." Prove you wrong, old man. That I have a feud with at the allotment. Yeah. Anyway, no dig. Pretty cool. There was one bit in here, Dan. I wonder if you'll know what I mean, where he references Freud and his understanding of hierarchy and of work, and I was pretty lost. So he says, a hierarchical mentality fosters the renunciation of the pleasures of life, as we were saying. It justifies toil, guilt, and the sacrifice by the inferiors, and pleasure and the indulgent gratification of virtually every caprice of their superiors. The objective history of the social structure becomes internalized as a subjective history of the psychic structure. Heinous as this view may be to modern Freudians, it is not the discipline of work, but the discipline of rule that demands the repression of internal nature. I don't know anything about these modern Freudians that he's talking about.
When he says not the discipline of work, but it's a discipline of rule. I mean, I'm not very fond of. And my appreciation of psychoanalysis largely stems from sort of like descriptions of the internal workings of singular human beings.
Sure.
Now, obviously, a huge amount of that is about the relationship between human beings to society and the sort of the upbringing and the sort of societal space that they're exposed to. I've never really engaged very well with, and don't find it difficult to appreciate sort of Freud's analysis of society as a whole. His suggestion is that his suggestion is that human beings have some kind of like animalistic behavior which has been suppressed, I suppose, by the development of
Work?
society.
Okay.
I suppose. I mean, I don't quite understand how the two differ significantly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
This
same.
is a problem, I suppose. Like,
Yeah.
I suppose you could say that like it's that it's that repression of sort of innate human desire which allows for a complex arrangement of work, but that complex arrangement will also require a certain amount of disciplining of human beings and instantiation of hierarchies, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that we read Kropotkin's Conquest of Fred, but yeah, I mean, he brings up an interesting point in that where he talks about talks up this question of like how would work in a post-capitalist world, and he brings up all these points where it's like that's a fake question. Give me a fucking break. Like you're gonna work harder, but you're gonna need to do less, but you're also gonna be able to do what you want. Everything's gonna be better. Blah 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 blah. But it's an interesting question, right? About like how does work function, as Bookchin would say, like as play, because that's the whole point of his anarchism, I guess, is to how to make work play and how to like how to make it basically impossible to tell the difference between the two, which is an interesting point. I guess that's kind of not really what Freud was saying. Maybe Freud was just saying like work is work, so shut up. I don't know. No idea. I just thought that was an interesting bit.
Yeah. I mean, I get the impression that Freud wasn't particularly interested in the sort of like complex relationships between large numbers of human beings at a societal level anyway, really. He was only particularly interested in the relationship between like two people.
Yeah.
Like beyond that point. Didn't say a huge amount about like societal desire or wish or like
I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah.
Was it you who told me that there are 3 types of people? There are psychopaths, sociopaths, and perverts. Is that correct?
The broad topology in psychoanalysis, or at least certain strands of it, is there are neurotics,
Neurotics,
psychotics,
that's it. Psychotics.
and
Perverts.
the pervert.
That last one seems like a slap in the
those
face.
various ones like break down into various different subcategories as well.
Interesting.
I mean,
I'm categorizing everybody I know.
Let's get very lost and expose.
I'll lay down.
Let's expose my very rudimentary understanding of these things. I mean, like, if neurosis is accepting like a sort of societal narrative, and psychosis is developing one's own narrative and understanding of the world.
Okay.
For life, kind of thing, as part of the developmental process, then perversion falls somewhere in between. Like you've started the road toward adopting sort of like a societal narrative and understanding of how the world functions. Very broad sketch, but you need to reinforce that relationship, but with certain compulsive behavior.
Interesting. Very interesting. So what's Bookchin, a pervert?
I couldn't possibly say.
I couldn't possibly. Interesting. Yeah, now I am just trying to think about everybody that I know.
But, I mean, that's sort of the danger that you get yourself into. No interest in diagnosing people other than myself. Desperate desire to diagnose myself.
Please.
What's wrong with me?
God damn it.
I mean, but there are like I don't know. There are interesting ways in which this topic is broached. Like, I do find it quite interesting that the sort of diagnostic structure and the understanding of the human psyche that comes from, psychoanalysis in particular, but I would imagine other branches of psychological theory and psychotherapeutic practice really are particular to a certain stage of history to some extent.
Interesting.
There was an interesting I started reading the next chapter, and he's talking about organic societies, obviously, and he's talking about the upbringing of children and the relationship between children and their parents and children and all of the members in a society. And he's sort of suggesting that there is the sort of the societal structure of that upbringing. He doesn't directly reference sort of psychoanalytic theories, but he does suggest that like it builds into people a very different relationship toward individuals and toward community kind of thing, which is quite an interesting idea to think that like different societal ways of operating, fostering the development of certain types of behaviors sort of determine the sort of like psychological structures of the people who live within a certain system kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's something I'd like to know more about, sort of like, well, did neurosis not exist before Enlightenment individualism came along? Were we all just some kind of like free-floating psychotics or
perverts?
Who knows?
Everyone was a pervert back in the good old days. I mean, what you're saying is one of the main kind of like ideas behind spoiler alerts for Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, but like the ending of The Dispossessed is you're kind of led to think that this whole society, this anarchist society, one that's kind of similar to like what Bookchin would perhaps consider. I would imagine she was very inspired by him. Kind of falls apart because, well, it doesn't fall apart. That's not true. But you see the cracks where there isn't this kind of like social, there isn't like a hierarchy, right? So there aren't people like telling you what to do and you can just kind of do whatever you want, blah, 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 blah. And that's how the society functions, is that everybody contributes to the society that they want, and that's how it's able to keep going. But the problem with that, I guess that I kind of took from it at least, was that you still have these social people exercising like ostracization in society, even without hierarchy, because they're like strained from the norms, even just a little bit. And that's like the fate of one of the characters, is that they start to like, they critique the anarchist society a bit, and they get treated like a crazy person, and they eventually go insane. And it's, yeah, I don't know, I think that's kind of one of the interesting, perhaps something to consider with talks about hierarchy, is that there are always, I think, going to be like societal norms, perhaps. Well, I don't know, maybe there wouldn't be. I mean, it's
sure. I mean,
utopian.
again, like, I mean, maybe it's been implicit in what we're saying, maybe it's been explicit in what we're saying. Obviously, it's Bookchin's intention to take this model of complex ecological systems and suggest that the ideal human system, the sort of like social ecology, is an equally complicated social ecosystem kind of thing. So I would imagine in his sort of idealized version, like, there would be space for all niches and all diversity, supposing that it was given the historical time to develop kind of thing. Supposing that, like, obviously he's a very sort of like dialectical thinker, like supposing that the dialectic unfolded in such a way that it gave space for all of these, like, all of these things. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mean, in the end of this chapter, actually, like his description of sort of like a sort of functioning ecological society or something actually felt quite familiar. I mean, there's quite a serious, like, obviously he lauds democracy, is very critical of representative democracy, and what it lends itself to is just as a rule of like tyranny or experts. And he's very anti sort of political authority. He's very anti vanguard to some extent. Obviously, it's sketched over quite quickly, but it seems to be that he sort of comes down on the side of describing the Bolshevik takeover in Russia as a coup, and sort of like he lauds the sort of spontaneity of the revolutionaries, or the sort of the regular people, I suppose, the workers. And derides and is derisory of any attempt to define that, or to strictly direct that activity, I suppose. So it's basically like in the same way that he suggests that human beings should respect, I suppose, and not seek too heavily to disrupt the spontaneity and the spontaneous behavior of nature. He also celebrates very heavily the spontaneity of human beings. Which, to some extent, in the kind of like ideal society, I would hold fully with that as well, I think.
Well, sure.
Or at least like as I mean, I don't quite know how much his vision of like of a ecological social system overlaps fully with like binary and cybernetics, say, but at least like I guess we feel like what we would want to say, like, as much initiative and spontaneity should lie with the people who are making that sort of in the grassroots position, sort of making the decisions, kind of thing,
for practical reasons.
Yeah. whether the ideal outcome for the Russian Revolution was to simply let spontaneity play out in its fullest form without any attempt to intervene or direct it. Well, it would have been a white victory in the Civil War. Probably.
Exactly. Nestor Menko would have won.
Yeah. There's that sort of like Trotsky quote that I find interesting. Like, if the whites had won the Civil War, then the word that we now use for fascist would have been a Russian word and not an Italian one.
Yeah. There you go. That's interesting too, tying this back to some other reading that we did, shines all the way, Dan, back to the Jack Sipes. Because he talks a lot about the necessity of utopian thinking as like a necessity to get to a better world. Because he says that you need to think in a utopian way, but I suppose what he's really saying is in a more creative way. Because without the creativity, without being able to like be like, well, what if this was possible? Why couldn't we do this? You're never going to get anything that's just beyond like reforms, right? I suppose is his point. And that ties directly back into his thoughts on systems theory, where it's like you need this kind of like diversity, not for like hippy dippy, I love using that word, just like fun reasons, like everybody just do your thing, man, which is what I thought he was going to be like. He was like, no, this is very practical. You need to have this diversity of opinions. You need to have creative utopian visions. Otherwise, literally nothing's going to happen. I thought that rocked. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how there's sort of like, there's some tidbits for the hippies, but it's like,
exactly.
Whoa, no, not too far.
Exactly.
We still need technology. Like, obviously, he's like super willing to celebrate technology, super willing to celebrate science. There's a really nice point early on when he quotes Marx very favorably of saying that like sort of development toward socialist society, I say, would be dependent on like a sort of poetic imaginary kind of thing, but creates this distinction between like, you can't rely purely on sort of like poetic fantasy and imagination, nor can you rely fully on sort of like mechanistic scientific process kind of thing. Like, it's some kind of synthesis of the two, which he's looking for.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
I suppose he's attempting to encapsulate in the idea of like the social ecological process.
Yeah, it's because his scientific views just seem to be slightly more creative than like.
Yeah.
It all ties together.
Yeah.
This chapter, man. This is one chapter. This chapter was good.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah.
10 out of
9.
Whoa, I was going to say 11. All right. Yeah, the only thing that I want to say, anything else, is just if you perhaps haven't read anything like this because you're concerned of reading an anarchist, because you're concerned of reading something that's outside of your purview, perhaps, pick it up.
What perversion?
Of your pervert. I mean, really check it out, because I was thoroughly surprised with what I found in this book, and I would not call myself an anarchist, although I would consider them, Dan, my comrades. And I'll use that word.
Fellow travelers.
For the first time, unironically. Yeah. Fellow travelers.
Yes, I cannot but agree with all that you have said.
Excellent. Wow. Fantastic. I think that this was a really good framing for us to perhaps talk more ecology in the future.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to say was I don't know how we're necessarily going to wrap our sort of small and smooth and easily distracted brains around reading this entire book such that we can cover it in its entirety.
Yeah.
Much as I'd like to like read it chapter by chapter and just do an episode, I'm not sure that would be the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll have to take a break from it and try and consume it at our own time and then come back to it and give it like a full hit or something at some point.
Yeah. Again, who knows what he says in the later chapters? Could go off the rails.
God knows. Yeah. Yeah, we do not endorse anything that is in any of the other chapters. But yeah. Read some goddamn Murray books. And hopefully we can use this as a sort of like a continuing development toward more engagement with ecological thinking.
Yes. I'm interested to compare, I think, eventually down the line, maybe soon, maybe somewhere down the line, we'll, again, read some Metabolic Rift, read some John Bellamy Foster, see what that's all about, and I'd like to kind of compare the two.
Yes, I mean there is in the discussion of that Petty quote about mothers and fathers.
Yeah.
Also, quite a lot of reference to metabolism.
Yeah.
So maybe we could go and read some of Bellamy Foster and then come back to this and sort of like.
Wouldn't it have been
bring the two
great
together
if our version of Capital
Had actually
used
used
the
that
word
phrase.
metabolism? That would be so great.
Wouldn't that have been convenient? Yeah. Very useful. Yeah, useful. Oh well.
Oh well. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Any good Star Trek, Dan? Anything like that?
I've watched very little of anything.
Can I say, Dan, it was called Timescape.
Was it really?
It was. I knew it was called Timescape. Well, I didn't. I was
sorry.
questioning
Yeah,
myself.
you were right. I was wrong. Yeah. Timescape.
Timescape.
Okay. All right, folks. If you haven't watched it yet,
all right, folks.
watch Timescape.
It's the third or fourth time to watch it. I watched a what did I watch? It was a John Carpenter movie, In the Mouth of Madness. It was alright. It was good.
Okay.
It was kooky.
Okay.
There was some fun.
Yeah,
like,
I'm not like. Don't tell me. I've watched the thing.
Exactly.
I didn't like it very much.
Give me the YouTube compilations of like the crazy prosthetic like monsters.
Yeah. I'd much rather watch the sort of like making of the thing. Probably.
Exactly.
They Live, classic.
Never seen it.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
I don't know whether there's any need.
All right. Yeah.
Just watch some video of Slavoj Žižek talking about it if you want.
Yeah. I'll finally watch the Jordan Peterson debate.
Okay.
There was something else it was trying to
Twisted
push on
my
me
arm.
recently that I haven't watched.
Is this a person or an algorithm?
An algorithm.
Okay.
The algorithm. Some like thing that people on the left talk about a lot that's on YouTube and that I just refuse to watch. That grosses me out. I forgot what it was. Something like that.
It's probably not worth it.
Probably some Bookchin interview.
Yeah.
Well, folks, another episode, and I would just like to say thank you very much. It's been such a good time.
It's been an absolute blast.
My name has been Jack.
And continues to be.
Continues to be
And
Jack
you're changing
Bookchin.
My name has and continues to be, and probably in almost all likelihood will be, Dan.
Damn. Well, there you go.
This has been Auxiliary Statements.
Thank you all very much for listening. See you next time or something. The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.